2001. Prior to that, she was Associate Professor of Sociology and Anthropology at Colgate University, where she also directed the college's Successful Women's Studies program. She's been involved in lots of grassroots organizations. She helped get Barbara Boxer elected out in California. She's been actively involved in many efforts to reform the political system. It's our great honor to have here today, Joan Mandel.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Aaron, I've never followed Langston Hughes, and I'm not sure I want to because he's a hard act to follow. But I did want to come today from Hamilton. This morning I was in Canastota, which is a tiny little town, and we had 15 people who were there in front of Congressman Bill Owen's office talking about fair elections and talking about reversing the corporate takeover of our democracy. So all over the country today, there are people that are rallying and taking a stand and saying that this is the time. This is the time we have to build a movement to take back our democracy from corporate control. So we're sending a message to Congress. That's what we're doing today. The American people are angry. The American people are fed up. It's not just the 50 of us that are here today. It's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of Americans who feel that they don't have a say, who feel that their voices are not being heard. And what we're doing today is just beginning, and it's going to build to help people get their voice, to tell them that they're not alone, to tell them that there are millions of us who want to make sure that our elected officials listen to us, not to their big funders. We're mad at the fact that the oil and gas industry in the last 10 years has given $253 million to Congress. $253 million in order to get their way in legislation, in order to make sure that BP isn't regulated and the kind of crisis that we've seen in the Gulf. The energy industry as a whole has given $513 million over the last decade. And the worst offender, as you know, and as you heard from Citizen Action of New York, is Wall Street. The finance industry has given more than $2 billion, that's the big B, $2 billion to Congress and to parties. And what they have been able to do with that is create a pressure for congressmen to not regulate financial institutions. And right now, as you know, we have still almost a 10% unemployment rate. We have a recession that we're just barely crawling out of. We've got people that are unemployed, people that have lost their homes. And this is not because the Wall Street in itself has done this. We need to really be understanding that it is the Congress's failure, our representatives' failure to regulate business that has created that. And why don't they regulate business? They don't regulate business because they depend on corporations for their campaign funding. Even the good guys and the good gals in Congress have no choice but to depend on big contributors. And that's what we have to stop. That's what we have to change. All the problems that we care about, there are people here from the peace movement, from the environmental movement, from healthcare movement, from people who have been fighting these fights for many, many years, as I have and many of you have as well. We're beginning to understand that all of these problems will not move. They will not change. They will not be solved until we change the functioning of our democracy. Because on all of these issues, the people's voice is not heard. It is the funders' voice. So we're here today to say to Congress, we want a government of, by, and for the people, not of, by, and for the corporations. That's the Move On battle and the Move On pledge, there goes my fair elections, is talking about corruption, and there's plenty of corruption. We have scandals in Congress and scandals in New York State that come all the time. If you're interested in waiting for a scandal, you won't have to wait long, because another one is coming around the bend any day. We know that. But the problem is not just a few bad apples. The problem is not just a few people who are abusing their campaign money, who are taking essentially legalize bribery from corporations in the form of campaign contributions. The real problem is that the barrel itself is rotten. I'm a sociologist and I'm always talking about systems. But in this case, it's true. It is the system that hurts not just you and not just me and not just Americans, but a lot of the good people who are trying to do right by being elected for office. They have to raise thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every day. I was a campaign manager when I lived in Pennsylvania for a really good guy, a guy named Bob Edgar, who's now the president and CEO of Common Cause. And there was no way that Bob was going to be corrupted, except he was corrupted. Because when we looked at who had a chance to talk to him, as campaign manager, I had to let the people who contributed money talk to him. And I had to say to my friends in the peace movement and the women's movement who hadn't contributed, sorry, he doesn't have time for you because he has to raise all this money. That's the deep corruption that our democracy has been taken over by in the funding of campaign. So we have a system that creates a voiceless population and gives a bullhorn to the corporations for their words. I was interviewed last week by WAMC, and the guy finally got it. He said, "Oh, you mean democracy is something like power to the people?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, that's an old slogan." I said, "It doesn't matter if it's old or new. Democracy does involve power to the people, and that's what we've lost. People in this country don't feel that they have power. That's why there aren't 1,000 people out today, because people feel that they can't make a difference. Our job today, and Move On's job, and Citizen Action, and Democracy Matters, which works with college students all over the country and in New York State, our job is to return power to where it belongs, to the people of New York and the people of the United States, and that's what we're starting today." Well, that sounds good. How do we do that? How do we do that? Well, the answer is that we figure out ways to elect representatives who actually represent us. And I want to talk just a little bit about the Fair Elections Now Act, which is the sign that I was holding up, and is one of the three planks, thanks Kara, one of the three planks in the Move On Pledge. Fair elections is based on the incredibly successful systems of public financing that have been in place in this country for 10, 15, 20 years. You know, in New York City, there is public financing for ordinary people to run for office. In Arizona, they elected a governor and a lieutenant governor and a third of the legislature among people who never took a penny from any big pharmaceutical company, from any big oil company. Public financing financed those races. And in Maine today, 85% of the Maine legislature is what we call clean. They haven't taken a penny from any big funder. They have run their races with money that comes from the public treasury. And that's what Fair Elections does. Fair Elections is a new system based on those systems, but different. It would allow people to run for Congress, you and me, even if we didn't have big bucks, and even if we weren't tied to big funders. It allows everyday ordinary Americans to run for Congress with a combination of small donations. You cannot elect any more than $100 from anyone, and with Fair Elections funds, public financing. So suddenly, if we could pass this bill, we would have people in Congress who were beholden to small donors financing. And that would make all the difference in the world. That would make all the difference in the world. It would mean that voters would have a real choice. When you go to the polls today, you choose between people who are funded by the same big. If we passed fair elections, we would have choice. If we passed fair elections, we wouldn't have special access to the corporate lobbyists who get in front of the line to talk to the Congress people. If we passed fair elections, we would have representatives who are accountable to the people. We would have the ability to begin to reverse Citizens United, which was a terrible Supreme Court decision that overturned a ban, a 100-year ban on corporate spending on political speech. We expect a flood of private money now from corporations into the political system. We have to reverse that Supreme Court decision. And even though, as I said, there aren't thousands out here, an organization that supports all of these changes did a poll recently and found 75% of the American people support the idea of fair elections now. The idea that anyone should be able to run for office. Anyone should be able to run for office. Move On has already collected 400,000 signatures on their pledge. And we hope that we're going to get 1 million of those signatures by Election Day. And Congress is not that far behind. We have friends in Congress. We shouldn't give up on them. Over 159 members of Congress, including my congressperson Bill Owens, as well as Tonko and Hinchey and others, have signed a pledge that said that they will vote for fair elections now. They're sick of begging rich people for money. They're sick of trying to vote their conscience when their big funders are telling them what to do. So this is exactly the time where we can make a difference. We've got an exciting bill in the Congress. We have to push our representatives to vote for it. We can make a difference today. So in Maine and in Arizona and in New York, we need to fight for citizen-funded elections, not corporate-funded elections. All right. So the third question is, we know what's wrong. We know that campaign funding from big corporations is the problem. We know what can replace it, fair elections now. And the question is, okay, well, what do we do? And people have already said it to you today. You're already doing what we need to do, and I thank you for coming today. But we need to do more. We need to call our representatives. We need to write our representatives. We need to make sure that our neighbors know what we think. People for years have stood up and spoken out and made change. That's how the war in Vietnam was ended, for those of us that are old enough to remember that. That's how the Civil Rights Act was passed, for those of us that are old enough to remember that. That's how the EPA got established, so we got some environmental protection, although obviously not enough. This country is a country where people can stand up and speak out for what they want, and that's a precious gift. I taught in China for many years, and my students kept saying, well, why aren't the American people standing up and speaking out? They have all these rights. They can talk, they can write, they can assemble. And I say to them, the American people often don't recognize how precious these rights are. But today, that's what we're starting. We're starting a new movement that recognizes our right and the right of our neighbors to stand up and speak out for fair elections, to stand up and speak out against the Citizens United decision. A friend of mine always ends his talks by having people repeat a phrase. So I'd like you to join with me in saying, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. Again, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. We can do it. We've done it before, and we can do it again. So I thank you for coming. Thanks to Move On. Thanks to Citizen Action of New York. Thanks for Democracy Matters for standing up and speaking out and ending the corruption in Washington. Thanks so much.